Welcome back, guys, to Dark Night Scare. In today's episode, I'm sharing 14 true and unsettling stories from Appalachian road trips. Stories like these remind us that some paths are better when left alone. But before we dive in, please don't forget to subscribe and make sure to like and share with your friends. Also, let me know where you're tuning in from. Thank you, everyone. Now, let's get started. I was 28 when it occurred. I'd been experiencing this slow, quiet burnout for months. Things I once loved failed to spark any excitement. Even silence felt like static, filling the space around me. Not depressed, just empty. My phone notifications piled up unread. I hadn't checked work email in 3 days. Walking into my apartment felt like entering someone else's life. Every object was familiar, but none of it felt like mine. So one evening, I walked out and didn't look back. No plan, no calls. I didn't tell a single soul I was leaving. I grabbed my car, filled the tank halfway, and drove. I had a week off work and no intention of explaining myself. I drove south from Ohio, following the back roads into West Virginia. 2-lane stretches wound through the hills, trees leaning close as if they were listening. I rolled the windows down, kept the music soft, and turned off my phone. The goal was nothingness. The kind that stretches out time, the kind that clears the mind. By the third night, I was deep in the Appalachian region. I had no idea where. One road had no official designation. Just handmade signs nailed to trees, suggesting fresh honey, a rabbit farm, perhaps apple slices. The paint was faded, the wood splintered. Not a single car in sight for more than an hour. The sun dipped behind the ridges, shadows stretching thin across the road. Twilight felt like it was breathing down my neck. I figured I needed somewhere to stop before it fully darkened. One shaky bar on my phone. I opened the rental app, half, hoping against hope. No hotels for miles, but one listing appeared. So cheap I thought it was a prank. Name, Cabin in the Heart. No reviews, just 3 blurry photos. A sunken and neglected couch, a dented stovetop kettle scarred from use, a bed covered in a quilt that had seen better days. No exterior shots, no description. I should have scrolled past, but I didn't. I booked it. Moments later, a message arrived. Short, efficient. Follow the gravel road past mile marker 12. Look for the fence with the antlers. Drive until it ends. Door is unlocked. That was all. No name, no greeting, just directions. The kind you'd expect in a place where Wi-Fi is a myth. I left the paved road. The gravel path cracked with weeds. At mile marker 12, I saw it. A rusted gate slumped in the brush. Next to it, a fence stretched into the forest. Barbed wire tied together with deer antlers. Some still had clumps of fur attached to the bone. They weren't decorative. They were raw. My heart skipped. I should have turned around. Instead, I pressed the gas and moved forward. The road narrowed into what felt like an abandoned fire trail. Narrow, rutted branches scraped the sides of my car like ghost hands. The undercarriage bottomed out twice. Trees arched inward until they met overhead in silence. Finally, I rounded a bend into a clearing. There it was, a cabin, greyed and leaning as if it had grown sideways from the earth. No porch light, no path, no welcome. And I knew deep down I shouldn't step inside. But the door was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. Furniture sagged, mismatched and tired. The kitchen held one burner, the crooked kettle, and a damp roll of paper towels. A chipped mug sat in the sink. No fridge, no microwave. The bedroom was merely a corner, with a cot covered by a wool blanket that promised to be itchy. And then there was the wall. Rows of Polaroids, dozens, perhaps 100, arranged above the couch like a patchwork of frozen moments. Each showed a person or a couple inside or around the cabin. They smiled. They held mugs. They gave thumbs up as if instructed. say you were here, but their smiles seemed mechanical, frozen. My heart hammered. I didn't move. I set my duffel down and turned slowly, letting the reality settle. No Wi-Fi, no signal. The world I came from had vanished. I was stuck. I pulled out a can of soup from my bag, tried to warm it on the tiny burner. It barely heated. I ate it cold, leaning on the counter. Each time I glanced back at the wall, the faces seemed to shift. Not enough to meet my eyes, just closer. Then one photo fell. A soft thud. No wind, just gravity. It showed a woman around. My age, short red hair, a flannel shirt tied at the waist. She stood sideways, not facing the camera. Behind her was the antler fence. A pickup truck sat where my car now did. Her eyes were closed. I picked it up. My palm grew slick with sweat. I pinned it back onto the wall, but not where it came from. I attached it in the center, hoping it belonged there. Then I lay on the cot. The blanket grated against me. I stared at the ceiling until my fingers fell asleep. I left the lamp on. Sleep came like fog. At midnight, I woke, not by sound, but by silence. Every night, noise had vanished. Not a breeze, not a cricket, only stillness. Something nudged me awake. I sat up. That's when I saw him. A man stood outside the window, still barefoot, clothes hanging loose as if they belonged to someone else. He was 10 feet away, angled, one arm raised, hand lifted, but not waving, not signaling, just raised. I froze. Time stretched. The cabin's dim light shaped him into a silhouette, but his face remained shadowed. Then he stepped backward, like a ghost, feet sinking into the trees until he was gone. My chest rattled with breath. I forced myself to move. I locked the door, shoved the chair beneath the handle, switched on the flashlight, though I knew it was useless. I stayed awake until dawn. When pale light touched the trees, I packed my bag. I whispered to myself, "Get out." Then I opened the door. The Polaroid wall was blank, every photo gone. In their place, 6 new ones, all pinned neatly in a row. The first 5 were strangers, expressionless, no background, all taken from the same angle. And the 6th, it was me asleep on the cot wrapped in that cheap blanket. The photo taken from the bedroom doorway. I didn't grab anything else. Not a charger, not toiletries. I slid into my car with trembling hands and drove. I didn't stop until pavement returned. That night, I was driving alone through the Appalachian backroads, trying to make up for the fact that I'd left hours later than I planned. I told myself I could still make it in decent time if I skipped dinner and pushed through. But once I left the highway and dropped into those narrow, coiling roads, I realized how long the night was really going to feel. The route twisted through the mountains in long, curling stretches that felt more like trails than roads. I remember thinking how the trees seemed to lean in closer than usual, just slightly, but enough to make me feel like I was being funneled somewhere, not simply driving through. They weren't towering or dramatic, just thick and close. It gave the whole place a strange sense of pressure. No stars, no moonlight, only 2 thin beams from my headlights with darkness swallowing everything else. My phone had dropped signal maybe 20 minutes earlier. At first, I didn't even notice. I was listening to music, following the GPS. Then the music cut out mid-song. I looked over and saw the frozen map, the spinning wheel, and that dreaded no service at the top of the screen. I wasn't surprised this wasn't a signal-friendly part of the state, but that didn't make it less unnerving. Still, I wasn't worried. I figured I'd just stay on the main road and keep heading west. I knew the general direction, and I'd taken this road before, not often, but enough to feel confident. I kept telling myself it was fine, just a quiet road on a late night, nothing more. That worked for a while, but not long after I passed what should have been the halfway point, I started noticing things that didn't fit. First was a rusted metal sign at the edge of a sharp curve. I slowed down just to read it. It pointed toward a place called Dowick, though most of the letters were flaking off or smeared with rust. The whole thing looked like it had been sitting there for decades. The odd part was, I was almost certain it hadn't been there the last time I drove this road. It wasn't just that I didn't remember it. It felt out of place, like someone had dragged it out of a junkyard and stuck it there. A little further on, maybe 15 minutes later, I saw a gas station ahead. This one I recognized, or thought I did. I remembered passing it on past trips. It had always been abandoned. Boards over the windows, graffiti on the pump housings, old plastic, signs hanging crooked. That brittle, sun-bleached look that only forgotten places have. Except this time, the lights were on. I spotted them first from a distance. Fluorescence under the canopy flickered to life, buzzing that low electrical hum you only notice when everything else is silent. Then the interior lights blinked on, flooding the front of the store in pale, hazy glow. The lot looked freshly swept, like someone had just cleaned up, but there wasn't a single car. I slowed down. Maybe I thought about pulling in just to check, maybe use the bathroom or grab a drink. But something about it felt staged, like it was pretending to be open rather than truly being open. I kept driving, and that's when I started to feel it, the wrongness. At first, it was subtle, a growing sense that the road wasn't doing what it should. Curves lasted longer. Hills rose higher or didn't dip back down where they should have. Places I knew I should have passed by now never came. My eyes kept flicking to the clock on the dash, trying to make sense of how long I'd been on this stretch. I couldn't tell if I was looping back somehow, or if something else was happening. That was when I noticed the headlights. They appeared in the mirror, distant at first, just a faint white glow over the rise. It didn't seem strange. Another car on the back road at night wasn't unusual, but it was late and I hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. It caught my attention. I kept checking the rear view. The lights didn't change. They didn't get closer. They didn't drop back. They just stayed where they were. Eventually, I could make out the vehicle. An old sedan. Big boxy frame. Something vintage, maybe late 70s. But the way it moved was strange. Every bend I took, it matched perfectly. Every rise and fall, it stayed in position. No drifting, no small corrections. It followed too precisely. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was just someone heading the same way. But the longer it stayed, the more it felt like it wasn't just driving, it was tracking. I started to get jittery. There was no real place to pull off. No shoulder, no exits, just trees and road. But 10 minutes later, I saw a gravel turnout. I decided to stop and pretend to check my phone just to see what the other driver would do. I slowed, flicked a blinker, and rolled into the gravel. The tires crunched loud in the silence. The sedan glided past without slowing. It crept forward like it was moving through molasses. I couldn't see the driver. The headlights were too bright. The glass just a blank silhouette. I waited until the lights disappeared around the bend. Waited longer than I needed to, just listening to the tick of the cooling engine, trying not to let my thoughts spiral. Then I pulled back onto the road. 2 turns later, the same headlights appeared again. Closer this time. I didn't think I floored it. The tires screamed against the curves. The suspension groaned as I pushed faster than I should, but the sedan stayed right there. Its headlights flooded the rear window, bleaching the interior in stark white. Every shadow vanished. All I could see was glare. My heart pounded so hard, I could feel it in my throat. I spotted a dirt lane veering left and yanked the wheel. The car skidded, gravel spraying, branches clawed at the side panels, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the headlights were gone. I didn't. Slow down. The lane narrowed fast, winding deeper into the trees. I wasn't even sure if it was a real road anymore, just packed dirt and overgrowth. I searched for a place to turn around. That's when my headlights lit up a tree ahead. A sign was nailed to the trunk, crooked like someone hadn't cared if it hung straight. It had my last name on it, painted in thick black strokes. Not a common name, and spelled exactly right. I slammed the brakes. I slammed the brakes. My hands shook on the wheel. I stared at the sign, praying I'd misread it, that it was coincidence, but I hadn't. I threw the car into reverse and tore back down the path, gravel flying. I hit the main road at full speed and didn't stop. But something was wrong. The pavement looked different. Cracks ran down the center. Weeds sprouted through like it hadn't been touched in years. The air smelled musty and sharp, like mold and ozone. The painted line was almost gone, just fragments of white clinging to the surface. Then I saw it. A mailbox at the roadside, old, rusted, and painted on the side. And peeling red letters was my first name. I didn't even blink. I hit the gas. I didn't stop. Didn't let up. Didn't check the mirror. I just drove until the sky began to lighten. The faint grey at the horizon told me morning was coming. And then just like that, the world snapped back. The roads smoothed out. The cracks vanished. Signs reappeared. Normal ones with towns I recognized. A truck passed going the other direction, and I almost laughed. I pulled into a big open truck stop off the interstate. Bright lights, cars, people, life. I parked. My hands still clenched the wheel so hard they hurt. I didn't get out right away. I just sat there letting the car idle, breathing, trying to convince myself I was back in the real world. That morning, I turned around and drove home. I didn't finish the trip. I didn't tell anyone. I was 21 when I believed I finally grasped what freedom felt like. That summer, Cam borrowed his uncle's old camper van, a bulky, clunky vehicle that looked like it had been parked under a tree since the late 90s. The paint was a fading, swampy green, marked by patches of spreading rust. One of the rear windows had a garbage bag taped over it, but we didn't mind. Inside, it was surprisingly livable. 2 benches that folded out into beds, a tiny stove, a cooler, and just enough floor. Space to stretch out in if you'd mind sleeping curled up. It was sufficient. We didn't need motels, maps, or a plan. It meant we could just drive wherever we felt like, whenever we felt like it. Our third friend, Leo, had just finished his last semester of college. None of us had jobs lined up yet. We figured this was the perfect window. A few weeks where no one expected anything from us, no responsibilities, no schedules, just freedom. The real kind. The kind that feels like a blank page. The plan, if you could even call it that, was simple. Head towards the Appalachians and figure things out as we went. We'd follow the blue highways, those thin lines on the map that wind between small towns and lead you into the best kinds of getting lost. No interstates, no chain stores, just old diners, gas stations with creaky screen doors, and roads twisting through endless pine. The first few days felt like a movie. We'd point to names we couldn't pronounce and drive until we found them. We ate gas station jerky for lunch and $3 burritos at places called The Skillet or Mom's Grill. We stopped at scenic overlooks, climbed onto the roof of the van, and watched the sun dip behind the trees while mosquitoes feasted on our legs. Nights were a mix of half sleep and cheap beer. We parked in quiet spots behind abandoned buildings, next to rivers and gravel pull-offs, crashing in a tangle of limbs and sleeping bags. Sometimes it was too hot, sometimes freezing, but we didn't care. Every morning we woke up groggy, sore, and completely thrilled. But the deeper we got into the mountains, the more things started to feel off. Nothing dramatic, just little things. Towns that didn't appear on the GPS, signs pointing in 2 directions for the same place, roads that were freshly paved turning to gravel abruptly. One morning, we stopped at a diner where no one spoke to us, not even the waitress. She took our order without looking up, placed the plates on the table, and walked away as if we'd ruined her night. We joked about it at first, calling it Appalachian energy. But the deeper we went, the less amusing it felt. There was one road, I swear to this day, that we climbed uphill, the engine grinding the entire time. But outside the window, the trees seemed to lean downhill, as if gravity didn't function the same out there. On the fourth night, we camped by a stream. The day had been perfect. Clear water, flat rocks to lie on, just enough shade to prevent us from roasting. We drank too much, stayed out too late, and started packing up around 10 p.m. That's when Cam suggested we find a hot spring he'd heard about. A local guy at a gas station had told him it was hidden in the hills, completely free, barely marked, usually deserted after dark. It sounded fantastic at the time, the kind of hidden gem this whole trip was about. Leo was half asleep, but Cam was wired from too much coffee, so we figured, why not? We set off up a narrow 2-lane road that twisted immediately. No signs, no lights, just the GPS insisting it was a straight line while we navigated turn after turn. A few miles later, even the GPS gave up. It just blinked out. Cam laughed and said it had finally realized we had no idea what we were doing. But I wasn't laughing anymore. The trees pressed in tightly, leaning over the road. The pavement crumbled at the edges. No reflectors, no shoulder. It felt like we were inching up the spine of something ancient that didn't want us there. Then, around one ordinary bend, the headlights swept forward and caught them. A woman and a little boy walking directly down the center of the road. Cam shouted and jerked the wheel. The tires screamed, and for a moment, I thought we were going over the edge. The van fishtailed, then caught itself. The headlights froze them in place. And that moment is burned into my brain. She looked completely ordinary, like someone you'd see at the grocery store. Middle-aged, brown hair pulled back, a cardigan hanging loose. No expression on her face, just blank, as if she'd become separated from the boy's hand and hadn't realized it. She was gripping his wrist tightly. He was tiny, maybe 3 years old, wearing fuzzy blue footy pajamas with a bear stitched on the front. His eyes were wide, but he wasn't crying or speaking. He didn't even seem scared. They both just kept walking. They didn't glance at the van. They didn't pause. They simply stepped past us and disappeared into the dark. I turned to look, but the curve swallowed them. Cam exhaled the breath he'd been holding. "What the hell was that?" he asked. "Who brings a kid out here at night?" That's when it hit us. There hadn't been a house for miles. No driveway, no porch lights, no cars, just trees. Neither of us said anything after that. 15 minutes later, we reached the hot spring. It was supposed to be empty, peaceful, secluded. Instead, the gravel parking lot was lit up by headlights. A group of people moved around in panic. Flashlights cut through the trees. Someone was shouting a name over and over. We stepped out, confused, and immediately a woman ran toward us. "Have you seen a little boy? Please, he's wearing blue pajamas," she pleaded, her voice cracking. Cam and I looked at each other. My stomach dropped. I didn't need to say anything. I ran to the van, grabbed the dash cam off the windshield, rewound the feed, found the frame, and froze it. I turned the screen so she could see, and she collapsed. "That's him," she whispered. "That's my son." She begged us to take her there. Her husband jumped in beside her, his face tight, eyes unblinking. Leo stirred in the back, groggy and confused, but we didn't have time to explain. A line of cars followed as we drove back. The road looked even more surreal the second time. Every bend looked identical, every tree a copy of the last. Just when I started to doubt we'd ever find it, the headlights caught something small near the guardrail. The boy, he was sitting on the edge of the road, hugging his knees to his chest. Not crying, just waiting. Cam slammed on the brakes. His parents were out before we stopped moving. They ran to him, knelt, scooped him up. He was shaking, but he was okay. He told them the woman had taken his hand, walked him up the road, told him to sit by the rail and wait, said she'd be back soon. Then she stepped into the woods and vanished, just like that. We all stood there a long time, silent, listening to the wind in the trees and the murmur of voices behind us. Then the police arrived, took our statements, copied the dashcam footage, said they'd search the woods and keep us updated. They didn't. Weeks went by. No suspects, no follow-up, no missing persons matching her description. Nothing. They mailed the memory card back in a plain envelope. No note, but the footage never left my head. There's one frame right before they vanish around the bend. Just a flicker. Her head turns slightly towards the van, towards the camera, and she's smiling. I was working as a freelance surveyor. Mostly it entailed weeks on the road by myself, driving down roads so empty they didn't even bother striping the center lines, poking around pieces of land that nobody cared about except the county office and whichever bank was stuck with them. In early October, I picked up this job to document a parcel buried somewhere in the Blue Ridge foothills. It sounded straightforward. Some photos, a sketch of the property lines confirmed the place hadn't been developed or turned into a junkyard. I'd been feeling cooped up in that tiny rented room above a florist shop in Radley. The walls smelled faintly of old potpourri no matter how much I tried to air the place out. So, I figured I'd stretch the job into a 3-day trip. Just a little break to clear my head. I left before dawn thinking I'd make good time. The highway was empty and I had that small sense of freedom you get when you know no one expects to hear from you all day. The sun came up behind me, and by the time I turned onto County Route 219, a thin veil of fog had started to burn off. I remember watching it drift in patches across the road, like it couldn't decide whether to leave. The last town I passed was called Dunning Creek. I only knew because of the peeling billboard on the way in. Welcome to Dunning Creek, with a painted trout that looked like it was about to slide right off the wood. The town itself had one gas station, a diner with plywood nailed over the windows, and a little post office that might or might not have been open. I topped off the tank just in case. The teenager behind the counter didn't ask where I was going, and I didn't offer. After that, the road shrank down to a cracked 2-lane that felt like it had been paved once and then abandoned to see how long it could last. My cell service disappeared in fits and starts. 1 minute I had half a bar, the next nothing but the little SOS symbol. I tried not to think about it. The directions said to stay on County Route 219 for 40M, then turn on to Sparrow Lane. What they didn't say was that Sparrow Lane looked like it had been cut by a tractor 50 years back and never improved. The asphalt was split into long seams, weeds pushing up through the cracks. Every so often, I passed a listing mailbox, or the remains of a barn so collapsed it looked more like a pile of driftwood. About halfway down, I spotted a sign nailed to a crooked post. Mathesy Hollow, 8 mile. That was the name on my work order. 8 miles, easy enough, except it wasn't 8 easy miles. It was nearly an hour of switchbacks that clung to the slope in a way that made my palms damp on the wheel. There wasn't a shoulder, just a thin edge of gravel that disappeared into trees. I kept telling myself it was fine, that if anything went wrong, I'd just back up carefully. But part of me knew there wouldn't be space to turn around. I didn't see another vehicle the whole time. No pickup trucks parked along the road, no tire marks. It felt like the trees were swallowing the last trace of everything. Eventually, the woods fell away just enough that I caught a glimpse of the house down in the hollow. 2 stories of weathered wood. No paint left. Every window covered in boards. A stone wall ran along the front yard. Most of it crumbled into a pile of mossy blocks. I pulled in next to what was left of the wall and shut the engine off. The sudden silence was so complete, it felt like I'd stepped into a vacuum. I sat there a minute with my hands still on the key, listening to my own pulse thudding in my ears. I got out telling myself this was no different from any of the other abandoned properties I documented. Just a job. The air felt still and expectant though, like the place had been waiting to see who would come looking. I slung the camera over my shoulder and started circling the house. Each window was boarded tight. Some of the planks looked newer than the others. Fresh cuts, clean edges. Someone had been out there more recently than the rest of the place suggested. That part stuck with me. I snapped photos of every side, making sure to get wide shots of the roof line and foundation. The ground was littered with broken shingles, scraps of old tar paper that stuck to my boots. When I stepped around the back corner, my heels skidded on loose gravel. I threw a hand out to catch my balance. That's when I noticed the car. A dark green sedan tucked behind a stand of scrubby weeds, all four doors shut, no license plate. The paint looked too clean to have been there long. I hadn't heard an engine, hadn't seen tire tracks coming up the drive. My mouth went dry. I crouched a little, trying to see inside, but the glare off, the windows was too strong to make out much. It felt wrong the way it just sat there, like it was waiting. I took 3 quick photos and backed away, telling myself it was probably nothing, just an old car someone dumped. I'd almost made it to the front steps when I heard gravel shift behind me. Need help with something. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the quiet in a way that made my scalp prickle. I turned so fast my knee nearly gave out. A man stood by the corner I just walked past. He looked older than me, thin face, skin pale enough that it almost blended into the boards behind him. He wore a canvas jacket, one sleeve darker like it had gotten wet and never dried out. His eyes were small and steady. He didn't blink. I cleared my throat, just documenting for the county survey records. I held the camera up a few inches like it was a badge. He tipped his head to one side, studying me. "That's your car up front." "Yeah." He didn't nod or smile, just kept staring for a few seconds. Neither of us moved. Then he turned and slipped behind the corner without a sound. My heart went ballistic. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself to look around the house and see where he'd gone. I couldn't do it. I forced my legs to move slow and steady across the yard. When I got into the driver's seat, I locked the door so fast my thumb nearly missed the button. Backing out, I checked every mirror. The sedan didn't move, no sign of the man. I drove on, and after a while, the trees began to flatten out into something that looked like normal forest again. I thought maybe I'd shaken it off. Then I saw another sign nailed to a post. "Math is hollow. 6 miles. My foot hit the brake so hard the car jerked. I stared at the sign, trying to make sense of it. No forks, no junctions. I hadn't turned around. I eased forward, repeating to myself that it was just an old sign someone hadn't taken down. But 20 minutes later, the same roofline came into view. Same sagging wall, same boards nailed across the windows, the same green sedan waiting behind the house. I didn't stop. My mouth felt sour, like I'd been sucking on a coin. I kept going, not looking anywhere but the road. The curves started to feel impossible, like the road was folding back over itself again and again. Dusk settled in slow and heavy until I couldn't see much beyond the headlights. When I finally saw a strip of pavement that looked different and the glow of porch lights, I almost laughed. The road spit me out into a crumbling lot in front of a convenience store. The sign above the door was hand-painted. The parking spaces were just patches of dirt. Inside, a woman behind the counter lifted her eyes and looked at me in this calm, resigned way, like she already knew why I was there. "You look a little lost," she said. "I think I am." My voice cracked on the last word. "I've been trying to find Mathesy Hollow for a survey." She didn't say anything right away, just turned her head like she was listening for something out in the dark. "Not a place you want to be looking for after sunset," she said finally. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't want to know. I bought a bottle of water. When I got back in the car, I sat there a long time with the engine off, waiting for my hands to stop shaking. When dawn finally broke, I drove west. I left the paperwork unfinished on the passenger seat. I didn't look in the rearview mirror to see if the green sedan was following me out. As a freelance photographer, I spent more days than I'd care to admit drifting around back roads, armed with stacks of old survey maps and a half-functional GPS. It sounds more glamorous than it actually is. Most people imagine some intrepid explorer in a jeep discovering hidden wonders. In reality, I spent most of my time alone, battling outdated directions and eating cold sandwiches in the front seat. That particular stretch of work began on a Wednesday in late September. I remember circling the date on my wall calendar at home. 3 days in and out, no trouble promised. My last job had dragged on for almost 2 weeks because the county archive had mislabeled half the road markers. So I told myself this time would be different. Simple. I picked up a beige sedan from a rental lot on the edge of Atkins. The clerk handed over the keys and mentioned the radio sometimes cut out. I figured that was the least of my concerns. By noon, I'd been driving through the Elkford foothills for hours. The GPS flickered between 2 bars of service and nothing at all. Most of the roads out there barely qualified as maintained. I'd rattle over a stretch of cracked asphalt and then, without warning, hit a section of gravel rough enough to rattle my fillings loose. Every mailbox I passed looked like it hadn't seen mail in a decade. Tilted poles, peeling paint, grass growing, up the posts. Once I spotted an old washing machine out in a field, a rusted lawn chair balanced precariously on top of it. For some reason, that image stuck with me longer than anything else. After a while, I pulled over to consult the printed, reference spread across my passenger seat. County Route 12B was easy enough to find. The line went west, then connected to something called Bowater Hollow Road. According to the archive copy, Bowater was just a dirt track looping back to the highway after 12 miles. I figured I'd knock it out by early afternoon. Finding the turnoff wasn't hard, but I still slowed down when I saw it. The entrance looked like it had been abandoned half a lifetime ago. 2 muddy ruts cut through a curtain of thorny green briar. A wooden sign warped from rain and sun sagged on one nail. You could just make out Bow faded almost to nothing. I had a moment where I gripped the wheel, thinking how nice it would be to just keep driving and call it a clerical error. But that wasn't why I got into photography. Even if the work was tedious, I liked knowing exactly what was out there. So I sighed, nudged the car forward, and watched the branches swallow the road. The first few hundred feet were tight enough that leaves scraped against the side mirrors. Gravel turned into solid, packed dirt, littered with broken glass, mostly brown bottles. The air inside the car felt stale and enclosed, even with the window cracked. Predictably, the GPS lost signal before I'd gone 50 yards. At that point, I wasn't especially concerned. Half the places I mapped didn't show up on live satellite feeds anyway. But about 5 minutes in, I happened to glance at the little compass on the dashboard. The needle drifted between north and east, unable to settle. I tapped the plastic casing, nothing changed. I figured it was probably just a cheap unit, but the way it quivered bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I tried to shake it off. The track started to rise, winding up in these slow, rolling inclines. On my left, I spotted a stack of split, logs leaning against a pine tree. I made a mental note to watch for it later, just in case. On the right, there was a long line of fence posts marching into the trees, each topped with a small scrap of frayed red fabric fluttering enough to catch the eye. No sign of animals, no houses. It was the quiet that really got to me. No wind, no insects, no bird calls, just the hum of the engine and the soft grind of tires over dirt. I tried switching on the radio, hoping for any local station, maybe a weather update, even static-laced bluegrass, but every frequency dissolved into the same fuzzy hiss. When the road curved around a bend, it narrowed so much I had to crawl along at 10 miles per hour. My attention slipped for a second, and when I looked up, my stomach clenched hard. The same pile of split logs was there again. Same angle, same piece missing from the top piece. I didn't want to believe I'd circled around, but it was the only explanation. I pulled off to the edge and climbed out, my boots crunching over broken twigs. The air felt wrong, too heavy, like the trees were breathing down my neck. I walked a slow circle around the car, searching for any clue I'd made a wrong turn. Nothing. Just moss and trees in the same quiet pressing in from all sides. When I slid back into the driver's seat and turned the ignition, the dash clock blinked 12 o'clock. My phone was dead too. I hadn't even noticed it powering down. A sour metallic taste rose in my mouth. I didn't feel afraid yet, just angry that the day had gotten this weird. I decided to keep going. I picked up speed, letting branches slap the side panels. A few minutes later, A flicker of motion caught my eye. On the right shoulder, a woman was walking. She wore a pale blue housecoat that trailed along the dirt, and her hair, long, thin, and grey, hung over her face. She moved with this slow, mechanical stride, never looking up. I braked hard. The engine idled in the sudden quiet. "Ma'am," my voice came out sharper than I intended. She didn't react. "Do you need help?" Nothing. She drifted past the car, step by step, then crossed behind the trunk and disappeared between two trees. I waited, straining to hear her footsteps. No sound at all. My hands were trembling when I finally pulled away. Another fork in the road came into view, and this time a rough plank hammered into the dirt indicated the path split. Turned back. The paint was fresh enough it looked almost wet. For a few seconds, I thought about reversing all the way to the highway, but the idea of backing down that road staring at the dark trees in my mirror made my scalp prickle. So, I picked the right fork and kept driving, telling myself it was the rational choice. The landscape kept repeating. Same downed logs, same scatter of stones in the ditch. I knew the odometer said I'd traveled 30 miles, but it felt like I was trapped in a single patch of forest. Finally, the trees thinned ahead. The track rose up a short slope and broke into a clearing. There was a house in the middle of it. 2 stories, weathered boards stripped of paint. The porch sagged so low, I wondered if it would collapse. One window gaped open on the second floor. I told myself I'd just turn around, but I didn't. My legs moved without my permission, carrying me across the yard. The porch groaned when I stepped onto it. The screen door swung free on a single hinge. I reached for the main door. Before my fingers touched the wood, it cracked open 3 inches. Darkness pressed inside, thick and unbroken. I waited. No movement, no voice, just my pulse pounding in my ears. Every part of me wanted to run, but my body felt slow, like I was moving underwater. I backed away 1 foot at a time and stepped down off the porch. When I turned back to the car, I saw something shift behind the rear window. A slow, deliberate motion, like someone adjusting their weight from one leg to the other. I didn't wait to see more. I bolted, fumbling with the door handle, threw myself inside, and slammed the locks down. My breath came in ragged gulps. The ignition caught on the second try. I threw it into reverse so fast the wheels spat gravel. This time, the road didn't split again. It stretched ahead in a straight line. I kept my foot down, watching the trees thin mile by mile. When the cracked yellow lines of the main highway reappeared, I nearly laughed. My hands hurt from gripping the wheel so hard. The second I pulled onto pavement, my phone lit up with a flurry of notifications, missed calls, and texts. I drove straight to a roadside motel in Grinnell, paid cash, locked the door, and shoved a chair under the handle. Then I sat on the floor, back pressed against the bed, and left before sunrise. Every summer we crammed into our aging silver SUV. Snacks were packed in, pillows tucked in corners, and the trusty cooler jammed between seats. Then we pointed south. It had become an unspoken tradition. My dad always avoided the interstate. He'd grumble that all the exits looked the same, lined with fast food chains and dull billboards. Highways are like endless grocery stores, he'd complain. Mountains have character. I usually didn't argue. The curves sometimes made me queasy, but tuning into music and watching the forest close in was beautiful in its own way. That year, however, something felt amiss from the very outset. We turned off the main road, Route 68, I believe, and everything shifted. Not the temperature, not the engine's hum, but the air itself felt denser. The trees loomed larger, darker. They didn't just border the road. They leaned in closer and closer until sunlight flickered across the seats like it was being stopped at checkpoints. My playlist hit a curb at that moment, and I didn't even skip the song. Normally, I'd be lost in the lyrics. This time, I was caught by how shadows crouched at the edge of my vision. Not long after, the GPS went dark. First, it stuttered as if struggling for breath, then it went black. Guess we're really off the grid now, my dad laughed, sounding confident, but I watched his reflection in the rearview mirror. For a moment, uncertainty sparked, and I felt a tightening in my chest I couldn't name. The road wound tighter, steeper, quieter. We hadn't seen another car in what felt like ages. My sister, Olivia, she was 10 then, leaned against the window, unnaturally still, mouth slightly open as if dreaming silently. My mum kept swinging her phone around, poking at the empty bars, sighing at each no service pop-up. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and watched the trees blur, then hesitate, as if even they weren't sure they should keep moving. We finally stopped at a gas station, though that's being generous. One rusty pump stood beneath a damaged awning, and a tilted sign simply read, "Fuel" in peeling red letters. The place looked deserted, as if someone had left under construction signs up for 30 years and never returned. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making my teeth ache. Behind the counter stood a man who stared without blinking, pale, thin, almost translucent. His gaze followed us, but never settled. My mum asked for directions back to the interstate. He spoke like a broken record. Slow, flat, left at the fork. Stay straight. Don't take the gravel roads. Then, as if he'd forgotten the rest, he repeated, only that part. Don't take the gravel roads. No blink, no nod, no smile. When we left, a woman appeared beside the SUV. Grey hair plastered against her scalp, clothes tattered. She stood so still, I thought she was part of the vehicle. Then her eyes met mine. She smiled, not warmly, but slyly, as if she held a private joke I wasn't meant to hear. Then she turned and walked backward into the trees, feet crunching as if she wanted us to know she was still there, even as she vanished. You'd think that would have been our cue to turn back, but we didn't. The road closed in again, narrow, cracked, begging for a tire blowout. The center lines vanished. Fog crept in, thick and low, swallowing the world ahead. That's when the signs appeared, nailed to trees like warnings. Keep driving. The first one screamed in thick black paint. I laughed it off. Who wouldn't think it was a prank? But my mum gasped, and she didn't look away. The next one read, "Don't stop." The letters were smeared as if written in a hurry. My mum whispered, "Should we turn around?" "The road's too narrow," my dad replied, clipped and sharp. "Nowhere to stop." Then came the last sign. "They're waiting." Silence filled the SUV. My sister twitched in her sleep. I thought I saw something move at the edge of my vision. Trees shivering, shifting. But when I turned my head, the movement vanished like it was ashamed of being seen. Suddenly, headlights blazed into our rear windshield. Relief hit me first, thinking another car meant rescue. But no, this car stayed glued to us. Same distance, same brightness. My dad sped up. The car sped up too. "Pull over. Let them pass," my mom begged. But there was no shoulder, just forest and sheer drops. That's when I saw them. People. They lined the roadside. Men, women, even children. Frozen, heads turned in unison, following us like tracking devices. Bodies still, eyes locked. "Faster," I whispered, my voice shaking. My dad pressed harder on the gas. The headlights swelled brighter. Too close, too fast. The road veered. Dad slammed the brakes. Tires howled. The SUV fishtailed, jerking sideways. Everything screamed. Metal, rubber, heartbeats. When we stopped, I turned to look out the back window. Nothing. Just fog and still trees. No headlights, no car, no people. Just absence. My mom muttered prayers. My dad hit the gas again. This time we didn't slow, not once. The fog thinned. Just like that, the road opened wide. A fresh green sign appeared. Interstate ahead. 5 miles. So ridiculously normal. No one spoke until we reached Red Vale. Exit 22. A small motel sign flickered neon. and somehow even welcome sounded wrong. I climbed out, reached for my bag. That's when I saw it. 4 vertical smudges stretched across the outside of the back window. Mud dragged down like fingers clawing from the top edge. I'd looked out that window 100 times. I would have noticed if it was already there. I didn't sleep all night. I stared at the ceiling, pressing my fingers hard against my eyelids, counting seconds until sunrise. I was 24 when I convinced Mara to take one of those fly-by-night weekend trips. Just 2 old paper maps, the kind everyone warns you to keep. She agreed, but only if we avoided the highways. Somehow, that sounded like a fantastic idea. So, we packed a cooler full of damp sandwiches. We grabbed 2 maps from the dusty rack at the gas station. Then we pointed our hatchback toward wherever the roads might lead. Late Saturday, we drove into what I still call the no-service zone. Not dramatic, just the GPS blinking. No service. Then, nothing. The kind of nothing that feels fine for a minute until it doesn't. We turned the radio off because it buzzed and sputtered between faint signals. Silence won by a landslide. The trees arched over the road like they were whispering something, though the air didn't move. Not creepy, just kind of waiting. Then we saw the sign, Caleb's Fork 4M. It leaned crookedly, half the letters missing. Mara laughed. That sounds like a place parents used to scare kids into behaving. I joked it was some bored local's idea of frontier marketing, but the strange feeling in my chest told me something was different. In a good way. We turned right there. The road shrank. First a single lane, then just gravel dust where 2 cars might once have passed. The sun dropped behind the pines. That cool, transparent patch of air suggested dusk was just ahead. We passed a mailbox. 1 mailbox alone. It leaned low, sagging as if something had tried to crawl out from underneath. No house beside it, just forest and an echo of stillness. We pulled into what might once have been a town. A ghost version at least. Roofs caved, walls cracked, porches rotted to twigs. At the end of the gravel stood a skinny church. Its steeple split like old wood. Does. A door hung on half its hinges. I killed the engine. The quiet filled in fast. My shoes sounded like they belonged somewhere else when I stepped onto the cracked flagstones. Mara said, "Let's check the church." She spoke as if she were committing us to a quick detour, nothing more. But her voice was flat, even, like it came from under anesthesia. I followed her. We stepped past bits of wood and broken shingles. Dust motes floated inside the boarded-up store across the way. Through a shattered window, I saw shelves stripped bare. No cans, no colourful packaging. Nothing. A single chair lay on its side in the middle, as if someone had dropped it and walked out. Everything was eerily clean, if that makes sense. Clean, but dead. That's when Mara spoke. Her voice was quiet, a little off. "There's someone upstairs." I froze, not because she was wrong, but because she sounded certain. I looked at the town, the silent buildings, the wind that refused to blow. Then at Mara's face, expression still, and I watched her walk toward the church without looking back at the store. My heart stumbled. I lunged after her, half in disbelief. The door hung ajar, as if it meant to stay that way until someone bothered it again. Mara knocked. 1 slow, deliberate tap. Silence so complete, it felt like a slap. Then a breeze entered, sudden and sharp. It pushed against us. Mara drew a breath that cracked in her chest. Someone was inside. She whispered it. I stared. No movement. No footprint across the threshold. I kicked a tiny pebble. It stayed pointed, unmoved in a place where it never should have been. "Let's go," I muttered. My voice sounded too loud. We sprinted back to the car, stumbling on gravel, adrenaline high enough to power street lamps. I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, but the road looked different. Or maybe I did. The trees leaned closer. The forest felt crisper, colder, smaller, like we had shrunk in place. That mailbox gone. The gravel didn't match anything in my memory. For a moment, I wondered if the headlights had pulled everything just out of sync. I pressed the gas. We rounded a bend, and there, a figure in the ditch, man-shaped, head down, not moving, watching maybe. My foot stayed down. Mara's silence settled over us like a weight. Minutes later, the sign reappeared. Caleb's Fork. 4 miles. My chest constricted. We had definitely moved, but now we were back, like the map was a loop. We didn't know we were on it. We didn't know we were on a loop. I stomped the brakes. The car shuddered to a stop. Mara pressed against the door, shoulders hunched, eyes wide in the shadows. We reversed, spun the wheel, and I floored it with desperation. Everything blurred. Every bend dared us to look, waiting for something to step out. Then I saw them, 2 shapes at the tree line, barely there. Pale, more like silhouettes watching. I didn't slow down. Fear and speed blurred together, pushing us forward. Then pavement cracked back into view. The gravel vanished. A neon sign flickered ahead. Tobacco bait, tom bait, cold beer. That blinking tasted like salvation, not because it was friendly, but because it didn't pretend. We kept going. Eventually, lights started to appear. Civilization, diner signs, a gas station just open enough to promise safety. I didn't even glance at the next sign. I just drove until we pulled into a hotel. I parked, deadbolted the door, and wedged the chair under the knob like a stake in the heart of the night. We didn't talk. I think we both knew silence was safer. Night hissed outside. Inside, I fumbled with my phone. I scrolled until I felt numb. I typed Caleb's Fork. Nothing. No travel blog, no Reddit thread, no historic marker, no satellite trail. Just green where the town should be. That silence hit harder than the figures in the ditch. We never spoke of it again. I'm not proud of that. But neither of us needed words to know what happened. As a surveyor in my 30s, I'd gotten used to spending weeks alone in places nobody cared about anymore. Overgrown pastures, boarded up churches, forgotten logging roads. If it was on a map, I'd probably been there at some point with a clipboard and a thermos of coffee. That October, a developer named Carl Whitlow hired me to map out property lines way out in the southern stretch of the Blue Ridge. He kept saying he wanted to honor the land's history, but everything about the contract screamed he planned to bulldoze whatever he found. Not my problem, though. I'd been behind on rent for 2 months, and the job was going to pay enough to catch me up. So, I packed up the essentials. Survey gear, work boots, an overstuffed duffel with 3 days of clothes I'd probably stretch into a week, and a plastic bin full of instant noodles. I left my place in Somerville around 4 o'clock in the morning and drove straight through for 11 hours behind the wheel, broken up only by one stop at a gas station where the bathroom smelled like an old fish tank. The first part of the trip felt like any other. My maps were folded on the passenger seat, the thermos balanced between my knees. The GPS was still chirping helpfully when the highways narrowed down to patch 2-lane roads than to gravel that looked more like someone's private driveway. About 50 miles past the last gas pump, I passed a boarded-up diner with a faded sign that said Dodd's Place in flaking red paint. The windows were covered in plywood, and there was an old rocking chair tipped over on the porch. I remember thinking that if this were a horror movie, that'd be my cue to turn around. I didn't. Not long after the diner, the GPS froze. The screen locked onto a T-junction I definitely wasn't at. I tapped it a couple of times, gave it the kind of annoyed look you give a printer that won't work, and waited for the satellite to catch up. Nothing. I pulled over next to a row of pines and spread out the printed directions on my hood. Some of the names had blurred where I'd spilled water weeks earlier. I tried to line up the roads with where I thought I was, tracing my finger over the lines. My brain felt cottony from the long drive, like nothing wanted to connect. Eventually, I picked a fork to the right, mostly out of desperation. The road wound uphill in a slow curve, and I tried to reassure myself I'd see some landmark from the file. An old grain silo, a collapsed barn, anything to prove I hadn't wandered onto private land. But the longer I drove, the less I saw. Just more trees pressing in from both sides, and the kind of silence that makes you feel like the last person left on Earth. By the time the sun dropped behind the ridge, my headlights looked weak, barely cutting the shadows. Every mile or so, I passed a driveway blocked by a rusted cattle gate or a stack of cinder blocks. The mailboxes were long gone, and even the numbers were missing from the posts. About 10 minutes past the last driveway, something flickered in, my rear view mirror. I braked more out of reflex than anything else. There was a wooden cross standing in the middle of the road behind me. I sat there with my hands locked on the wheel, trying to process it. The cross hadn't been there 2 seconds. Earlier, I opened the door and stepped out, gravel shifting under my boots. The cross was maybe 2 feet tall, nailed together from rough boards with a strip of faded red cloth tied around the center. Up close, I could see the ends were freshly cut, pale wood that hadn't had time to grey in the weather. I crouched beside it. There was no mound of dirt, no sign. It had been moved or dropped. It was just there, planted perfectly upright. I didn't touch it. I backed away and got in the car, trying not to imagine who or what had set it there while I wasn't looking. Another mile ahead, the gravel turned soft. My tire sank an inch, then 2, with this slow, deliberate sag that felt personal somehow. I tried to ease forward, but the ground swallowed the front wheels in a heavy slump. I shifted into reverse and hit the gas. The tires spun, spraying wet grit against the undercarriage. No movement. My heart was hammering now in this fast, shallow way that made me feel a little dizzy. I turned off the engine, climbed out, and squatted next to the front wheel. The dirt was smooth everywhere except where my tires were buried, like it had decided to give way, just for me. I got the folding shovel from the trunk and started digging. The dirt came up in thick, wet clumps that clung to the blade. My shoulders were already trembling by the time I'd cleared enough to see the tread again. I tried the engine, just a sick little sputter and nothing else. It was fully dark now. The road behind me looked like a tunnel. My phone was still dead. I had 1 bar the last time I checked, but even that had vanished. I stood by the hood for a minute, telling myself I'd wait in the car until daylight. But the thought of sitting there in the dark with those crosses made my skin crawl. So, I locked the doors, took my flashlight, and started walking uphill. At the first bend, I stopped, so fast my boots skidded. Another cross stood right in the middle of the road. Same size, same strip of cloth. I exhaled slow, like maybe if I acted calm, this would make sense somehow. I stepped around it and kept walking. My flashlight beam jittered across the road. 100 yards later, another cross, then another. Some were taller, some shorter, all freshly cut, the same pale wood, the same red cloth. I started counting without meaning to. 4, 5, 6. By the time I passed the 9th, my pulse was in my ears. That's when I heard footsteps in the trees to my left. 1 step, then nothing. I stopped listening. The dark was thick enough. It felt like it pressed on my shoulders. Hello. My voice sounded thin, almost comical. I kept moving faster this time. My boots crunched on the gravel, loud in the quiet. At the 12th cross, the footsteps started again, matching my pace just out of sight. I kept my eyes fixed ahead. When I reached the 15th, a voice called out, "You're on private land." It was close. Closer than I wanted to think about. The tone was flat, neither friendly nor angry, just a statement like reading off a list. "My car stuck," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just need help." Silence. The footsteps shifted, angling across the slope. At the 17th cross, my boot hit something hard. I looked down and saw a piece of bone wedged in the dirt. I swallowed hard enough. If it hurt. The voice came again, softer. "You shouldn't be here." I turned just enough to see trees shifting like something big and low to the ground was moving through them. My knees went to rubber. I turned back to the road and ran. I counted crosses as they blurred past. 1920-21. At the next bend, the road straightened. My flashlight picked out a shape ahead. My car sunk to the axles exactly as I'd left it. I stopped so hard I almost fell. My breath sounded ragged in the quiet. The voice floated out from behind me. "It's waiting." That was enough. I sprinted to the driver's side, yanked the door open, and climbed in. My hand shook so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in. The first turn, nothing. The second, a flicker of the dashboard lights. The third, a cough. Then the engine caught. I threw it into reverse. The tires sucked free with a sound I'll never forget, and the car lurched backward onto gravel. I didn't. Looked behind me, didn't slow down until the trees gave way to cracked pavement when I finally spotted the glow of a Gulf Station canopy. It looked so bright and clean. It felt unreal. I pulled up to the first pump and killed the engine. My hands were still trembling as I set the brake. I sat there a long time, just breathing, trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined any of it. But in the end, I don't know who put those crosses there. All I know is I kept driving and didn't look back. I was working as a field tech for a small environmental survey company based out of Rockford. Not exactly the kind of job you brag about to impress people, but it paid enough to keep the lights on and gave me plenty of time to myself in places most people never bother to think about. Honestly, I didn't mind it. I liked the quiet, the feeling that I was the only person for miles in any direction. Most weeks, I spent more nights crashed in borrowed trucks or barely clean motels than I did in my own lopsided apartment. You get used to it after a while. You learn which motels offer decent coffee, which ones have locks you shouldn't trust, and which stretches of road are most likely to rattle your muffler loose. That July, the office sent me out to document invasive plant growth along a network of old back roads buried in the Calhoun foothills. On paper, it sounded straightforward. Drive a bunch of neglected county highways, photograph flagging kudzu, and wisteria thickets and record coordinates to log back at headquarters. They told me I'd be done in 2 days, maybe 3 if something slowed me down. It was the 3rd day before anything started getting strange. I ended up staying at the last site longer than intended. The flagged kudzu was wrapped behind a collapsing horse pen fenced by vines. The coordinates my supervisor emailed me looked like someone had typed them blindfolded. My tablet froze twice, and when it finally started working, it insisted I was standing in the middle of a grocery store 50 miles away. By the time I got the data logged and took all the photos, the sun had already gone behind the ridgeline. Out there, when daylight goes, it doesn't ease into dusk. It just goes black all at once, like someone flicked off the world's last working bulb. The van I had wasn't inspiring confidence. It was a tired white cargo model with no rear windows and a starter that loved to fake you out. Sometimes it would pretend to turn over, then die with this pitiful little rattle that sounded like coughing. You'd have to coax it back to life by jiggling the keys and muttering threats under your breath. I got the engine started on the 2nd try and pulled onto the road. My tablet, bolted to the dash with an arm that wobbled every time I hit a pothole, was supposed to guide me home. The route line kept flickering and blinking out, jumping my location back and forth by half a mile, like it was trying to decide where reality stopped. I had a folded map on the passenger seat, one of those big laminated county ones. My supervisor had taken a blue pen and circled a route, telling me it was a shortcut that would save me an hour of backtracking to the main road. Supposedly completely reliable, used by locals all the time. About 10 minutes in, the road turned into a tunnel of trees so dense my headlights just seemed to dissolve into the darkness. I stopped seeing mailboxes. No fences, no hand-painted signs on posts, nothing but cracked blacktop and the occasional barbed wire snagged in weeds. I told myself that was normal. You get used to the emptiness in places like this. I tried to call the office just to confirm I hadn't drifted onto a private farm lane, but my phone didn't even attempt to find signal. The little bars stayed flat and grey. Out of habit, I switched on the radio. All I got was a low hiss, so constant it almost sounded like the static had been there forever, waiting for me to turn the volume up. I kept driving because there wasn't anything else to do. A while later, I glanced at the odometer and realized the trip counter had reset itself. It was sitting at 0. I hadn't touched the button. I pressed it again, thinking maybe it just glitched. Nothing happened. For the next stretch, I stared down that endless strip of pavement, hoping to see something familiar. Just one landmark to prove I hadn't driven in a circle. A bridge, a gravel turnout, even an old stump. But there was nothing. Eventually my headlights caught a strip of white fabric tied tightly around a sapling on the shoulder. It looked clean, too clean for a place so neglected. The cloth shifted just slightly, but I couldn't feel any breeze through the open driver's window. I slowed as I passed. In the mirror, it vanished in the dark. A few minutes later, something else appeared. A strip of bright orange tape nailed to a wooden stake. The wood looked brand new. I pulled over, engine still idling. When I opened the door and stepped out, the quiet felt like it was pressing down on my shoulders, heavier than it should have been. The tape looked like standard construction marker, the kind I'd seen 1,000 times. But there was no equipment, no gravel BMPs, no fresh tire tracks, just that one stake standing there in the dirt. I didn't feel any urge to check closer. I got back in and pulled away. Time blurred into this steady rhythm of driving, checking the odometer, watching the dark. The road stayed perfectly straight. No curves, no forks, no dips. It felt like a hallway built just for me. I kept telling myself I hadn't turned around, hadn't lost my bearings, but the trip counter still wouldn't move. After a while, the shadows between the trees started to look like figures, like people standing there watching. I blinked and rubbed my eyes until they watered. My heartbeat climbed into my throat and just stayed there. Then I saw it cresting, a shallow rise. A white SUV nosed into a ditch. The driver's door hung wide open, no hazards blinking, no dome light shining. I slowed down to almost a stop, squinting into the trees for any sign of someone waving me over. Nothing moved. The seats were empty except for a folded blanket. No footprints in the dirt, no broken branches suggesting someone had run off. I coasted past, keeping my eyes locked straight ahead. My first thought was that whoever owned it had gone to get help. My second thought was they hadn't left willingly. I kept driving because I couldn't think of a better plan. Another mile went by and then I started seeing more stakes. Bright orange tape nailed to clean wooden posts. They showed up every 20 feet along the shoulder, stretching into the trees like a path. I pulled over again, engine running. I counted them, 12 in all before the line curved out of sight. No tracks, no tools, just the markers. I eased forward, hands slippery on the wheel. Didn't take long before they reappeared. Same spacing, same tape. I stopped again, flipped the map open across my knees. The blue line my supervisor drew ended at a junction that didn't exist. Nothing around me matched a single landmark on the map. I reversed until I'd passed the last stake and turned around. For the first time in what felt like hours, the trip counter started moving. 1 mile, 2, 3. But nothing changed. When I came back around the bend where the SUV had been, it was gone. No sign it had ever been there. No disturbed gravel, no drag, marks, just empty shoulder. I didn't slow down. My chest was tight enough it felt like my ribs might crack. I focused on counting breaths. 4 in, 6 out. Just to keep from thinking too much about what any of it meant. Maybe 10 minutes later, a small wooden sign appeared on the right side. It was nailed to a post at an angle, as if put up in a hurry. The paint was black and uneven, letters slanted and rushed, with an arrow pointing left onto a narrow gravel track. I stopped. My brain felt like it was stuck in glue. Every instinct screamed at me not to turn, but nothing in me believed the paved road was ever going to end. So I turned. The gravel narrowed fast, branches scraping along both sides of the van, sounding like fingernails on metal. I tried to keep my eyes fixed straight ahead, but the headlights picked out shapes I wish I hadn't seen. Bundles wrapped in faded tarp, coils of rope, a single boot half buried in the dirt. I passed them without slowing. The track curved hard right and opened into a clearing. A low cinder block building crouched at the far end, its metal door propped, open with a brick. A lantern glowed inside, dull yellow light barely spilling past the threshold. I braked, engine idling. My hands were shaking so badly I had to steady them against the wheel. Nothing moved. Then I reversed, tires spitting gravel. At the bend, my headlights swept over fresh tire tracks crossing mine. Wide, deep treads that hadn't been there before. I didn't think. My heart jerked so hard it hurt. I turned the wheel and floored it, bumping over ruts and roots, past the sign until the cracked pavement reappeared. This time, the SUV never came back. No marker on the shoulder, no trace it had ever existed. I drove. I didn't let myself blink until I saw a giant billboard rising out of the trees, bright lights announcing a Sungo station 2 exits ahead. When I pulled under the buzzing floodlights, I just sat there gripping the wheel until the ache in my wrists turned numb. It took me a minute before I trusted myself to look at my phone. Full signal, like nothing had ever been wrong. I locked the van, walked into the station without looking back, and decided right then I wasn't taking any more shortcuts for the rest of my life. I spent most weekends back then exploring the Appalachian backroads. It wasn't a project, and it wasn't a search for something. I just liked empty, twisty asphalt that seemed to lead nowhere. Just curves slicing through ridges and hollows. The world falling away until it was just me and the road. And somehow that felt like freedom. I kept a dog-eared notebook on the passenger seat. Inside were lists of every road I'd tried, which ones felt promising, which felt stale, and which I might revisit someday. That weekend, I pulled out my not-so-trusty map and pointed at Route 92B. On paper, it was barely even a line, a faint grey whisper begging to be ignored. That was exactly why I chose it. The turnoff wasn't obvious. It was hidden behind a pair of leaning pines sagging like weary old men, their branches brushing the pavement. Grass grew right through the cracked asphalt, nearly joining the edges in a green seam. I could have missed it if I hadn't been paying attention. And maybe that was part of the appeal. Right away it felt deserted. No shoulder, no signs, no other cars. The trees leaned in too close, branches whispering against the roof in a dry rustle. Not loud, but insistent enough. I muttered to myself, just another forgotten road. Nothing out of the ordinary. But even as I said it, my voice felt faint, distracted. Soon enough, I passed mile marker 12. The paint was so faded, I almost drove right by. The post was dented, the metal puckered, and there was a neat bullet hole in the corner. I made a note, M12, dent plus bullet hole, and kept going. A few minutes later, marker 13, slightly less worn, but still battered. Then marker 14. I smiled, thinking, at least there's some order, a little human trace cutting through the wilderness. 10 minutes later, I blinked. There was 12 again. The same dent, the same hole. I slowed, leaned forward, stared out the window. This was exactly the marker I had just passed. I looked behind me. No forks, no side paths. Nothing that looked like a turn. Just more trees. I told myself I was tired. Maybe I spaced out. Maybe the road curved back without me noticing. I'd done stranger things out there alone in the middle of nowhere. So I shook my head, gripped the wheel tighter, and kept going. But then it happened. Again, marker 13, then 14, then back to 12. Something tightened behind my ribs. My stomach gave a little jump, like when you're about to laugh at a joke, but your teeth clamp shut instead. I breathed slow and whispered, "You've got this. You're just tired. Keep going." That's when I saw the house. It sat maybe 30 feet from the road. No driveway remains, just dirt and patchy grass that looked untouched for years. The clapboard siding was so weathered it looked fuzzy. The whole structure leaned to one side. The front door hung slightly open, drifting like it had caught a soft breath of wind. In the yard sat an ancient truck, rust spreading across its body, tires sunk almost to the rims. Its windows were blackened, either stripped out or sealed long ago. I didn't slow, I didn't blink. Empty houses exist everywhere on roads like this. It might have been leaning, but nothing worth startling over until I saw it again. Same house, same truck, same half-open door. This time, my breath caught sharply in my chest. I eased off the gas, telling myself it was a trick of the trees, but I knew that wasn't enough. The next time, the door was open wider. That tiny shift felt deliberate, like someone or something was waiting for me to notice. The fourth time, a figure stood in the doorway. No face, no details, just a shape, still as stone watching. It didn't move, didn't wave, didn't follow me with its gaze. But I felt seen. My chest stuttered. My foot slammed the gas before my mind caught up. I didn't breathe. I didn't look away. I didn't even blink. I just drove. The mile markers came again. 12, 13, 14, back to 12. They rolled by like mocking little deadlines. The house followed. The door, the figure, each time the same. Each time, watching me like I was the intruder. By then, my phone was dead. The GPS had gone grey miles back. No signal, just a blank screen. The map in my glove box showed 92B winding through ridges and hollows, but it didn't show loops. And it didn't show a house that seemed to stalk the roadside. I must have been out there for over an hour. The low oil pressure warning had long since flashed. All I had were the scribbles in my notebook and the scraps of memory holding me together. Then I saw headlights far down the road, a pair bouncing toward me through the trees. Relief hit so hard I nearly slumped forward. Another car, another person. I flicked my brights. I tapped the horn, begging for acknowledgement, for proof that I was still real. But when it pulled level with me, it wasn't another person. It was my car. Same make, same model, same cracked taillight cracked a week ago, same faded bumper sticker I'd never peeled off, backing into a mailbox. And behind the wheel was me, not looking, not reacting, just driving forward, as if I wasn't even there. I swerved hard, gravel spitting from under the tires, every muscle in my body seized at once. The other car didn't hesitate. It rolled on, taillights fading red into the trees. I froze. The world felt brittle, too sharp, too real. Dust settled in the beam of my headlights, hanging there like it belonged more than I did. That's when I realized forward meant chasing, that version of me. Backward meant passing the house again, passing the figure waiting in the doorway. Waiting. Panic chewed at me. But somewhere under it, a decision clicked. I threw the car into reverse. The engine groaned, gears grinding as if it knew this wasn't what it was built for. I crept backward, one hand tight on the wheel, one clutching the seat. My breathing was shallow, ragged. I refused to look at the house, but I felt it there. The doorway beside me, the figure at the edge of my vision, still silent, waiting for me to turn. I didn't. I couldn't. The car rattled and shook, but I kept going. Not until the tree line thinned. Not until the pavement smoothed back into the highway I recognized. At the gas station, I stopped and killed the engine. Only the soft tick of cooling metal filled the silence. My hands trembled so violently, I thought I might leave fingerprints etched into the wheel. I pressed my forehead against it, but the sense of motion didn't stop. For a moment, I swore the car was still moving forward, backward, sideways. I had to look up just to be sure. I've never driven 92B again, and I stopped those solo Appalachian runs. I was 29 when I walked out of that cubicle in Philadelphia, and I mean really out. My chest felt too tight, like every beep from the printer was reminding me I wasn't breathing. I grabbed my bag from the desk, grabbed my mixtapes, and just left. No plan, no GPS, no real destination, just a half-empty cooler, that rattling, dusty hatchback, and this idea in my mind that I'd reach a place where the air didn't feel compressed. Call it freedom, call it escape. Whatever it was, I needed it. On the third morning, I was somewhere in the Appalachians, winding through roads that seemed to fold in on themselves. Sunbeams streamed through the trees, falling on the dash like spotlights. And I swear my mixtape sounded like memories rather than songs. I blinked a few times and noticed the pavement had cracked apart. Soon enough, the road was more weeds than asphalt. It dropped me onto a track not on any map I'd stolen. From the gas station, a faded green sign flickered past in my side mirror, Quarry Lake 7. I shouldn't have trusted that old weathered sign, but something about it, the way it was half swallowed by vines, felt more interesting than safe. So I turned. The station I found wasn't active by any measure. Pumps leaned at odd angles, clearly long dead. The colours of rust were all different shades of tired. And then there was an old soda machine out front, looking like someone's idea of rural nostalgia gone forgotten. One button still glowed dim red, like it was winking at me, daring me. I pressed it. The rattling inside was faint, but insistent. Soon, a bottle tumbled out with a hollow clang that echoed in the quiet. No brand, just WL Waiter printed in thick, bold letters. No barcode, no ingredients, no refrigerate after opening. No made in, nothing. I grabbed it and placed it on the passenger seat. My fingers brushed the condensation as it sat there doing nothing except existing. I didn't open it, but I kept glancing at it like I might still change my mind. I didn't, not yet. The silence arrived just then, not the hushed kind you get in a forest. This was a different kind, like someone had muted the world. No rustle of leaves, no birds. The car felt small, like everything outside had cut the power. My skin prickled, not because I was scared, or at least I wouldn't have called it fear. It was more like walking into a room with no air. I kept going, and then I rounded a corner, and there they were. Signs handmade, hammered into aged wooden planks. Something scraped and rough and two deliberate words. CELENC bleed once S. On the road. They were low, maybe knee-high, like someone didn't want me to miss them. My breath caught. Was this a performance? A warning? A joke? Someone forgot to laugh at? The letters were crude. The wood was splintered. All of it felt heavy, purposeful, and then the light changed. The sky was still the same color, but it felt like someone slid a gray sheet over it. It was still around 2 o'clock in the afternoon if I checked the clock, but the world inside that light was dusk. The windshield drank the light instead of reflecting it. I checked my phone. Definitely 2:12 p.m. by its screen, but it didn't feel like that. It felt pressed dusk without sunset. I slammed the brakes and then realized the road behind me was gone. No gravel, no pull-off, no turning back, just green pressing in. I stepped out. The hollow crunch under my boots echoed back like a reminder. I was out here, and if that road wasn't there, I couldn't undo this. All around me, trees stood like an audience, silent and impartial. I turned slowly. Nothing moved. Nothing had moved. A root might have crept beneath the surface, but I didn't hear it. I climbed back in. I had no idea what I'd seen or where I was, but I had to keep going. Minutes later, or maybe hours, I had no clue. I passed a mailbox just sitting in the middle of the road, black and battered, oddly out of place. It looked old, like something out of a rural TV show, except it didn't have a post. Just landed there. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, another Webwaiter bottle. Same design, same label, but this time thick marker scrawled on the side. Uppercase, do not drink, drive thug. New ink, sharp letters, the kind that jolts you into awareness. I saw it, felt my pulse jerk, and kept going. Didn't open the door again. More signs came closer together this time. Hastier scrawls, hands on wheel, no left turns, count your miles. They appeared on tree trunks stuck in soil, as if planted there. Each one edged on louder, more urgent. The forest felt tighter now. Branches brushed mirrors, tickled the roof of the car like they were testing strength. I felt watched, not by eyes, but by presence. The radio clicked on. I didn't touch a dial. I didn't turn the thing on. Static hissed, and then light words slithered out of the speakers. My name whispered. I stared at the dash, then repeated, angrier, more insistent, like the voice wasn't trying to say my name. It was trying to tether me to a thought I couldn't catch. I spun the dial. Nothing. I yanked the panel off, wires dangling, and threw it into the woods. Now it was quiet again. Cold silence, flickering. In that car, my odometer ticked beyond 22 miles since I turned off the main road. That number 22 felt arbitrary, but heavy. It felt like a countdown I didn't want. Then I drove a corner and saw the lake or whatever it was. Black glass so still it didn't reflect, like a horizonless void hovering. No birds above. No wave, just perfect weird nothingness. A white van idled beside it. Door cracked open. Quiet engine. It felt like an invitation. I swallowed. I pressed on. Then a plank flat across the road in front of me. Do not stop. He sees. You. Jagged letters like claws scratched into the wood. And me, I obeyed. I didn't even think. I heard the board crack beneath the tires as I drove over it, like a reminder that I was still moving. That's when I saw movement in the mirror. Van behind me looming in the corner of my eye. Something moved. It didn't walk. It didn't walk. It glided. Shape humanish, but limbs twisted at wrong angles. The head didn't turn right, but the eyes stayed locked on me. Just seeing it, a flash was enough. I hit the gas too hard. My heart like a jackhammer. My vision narrowed. Suddenly, forest ended. Birds, wind, sunlight splintering through leaves. Silence felt normal again. The road widened, smooth and forgiving, like nothing had happened. I blinked. Blinked again. I found a gas station soon after. Flickering fluorescents, stale coffee smell, buzzing lights. The guy behind the counter looked at me like he'd seen me bleed dry. Didn't ask questions. Didn't have to. He said, "You're not the first to come out of that stretch, but you're the first who made it alone." No judging, just acknowledgement. I nodded, paid, bought the ticket out. I never drove past that part of the world again. That September, I picked up an assignment to chart a network of abandoned county routes, winding through the western ridges near Alder Creek, deep in the Appalachian Mountains. I figured it would take me 3 days, maybe 4 if the weather turned, or I ran into a rock slide. I stocked up on cheap instant meals, a stack of paper maps I didn't really trust, and the tablet I used to log every twist and turn. I also threw in my old camping gear just in case I got stuck overnight somewhere without cell service. The first day felt routine. I drove along 6 or 7 roads that hadn't appeared on an official survey since Eisenhower was president. They were overgrown and rutted, lined with barns that looked one good storm away from collapsing. In a way, I liked that part, recording things everyone else had decided weren't worth noticing. The next morning, I rolled out of Milford before dawn. The only place open was a gas station with a single pump and a cracked ice cooler. The guy behind the counter looked at me like I'd told him I was planning to count every pine tree. He rubbed his eyes and said, "There's nothing up there, worth finding." I remember giving a little laugh. "That's the idea," I told him, and he just shook his head like he pitied me. By midday, I'd made it up past an old fire watchtower, the kind with rusty stairs spiraling up into nowhere. The air felt different up there, hushed and heavy, like the trees were waiting for something. My phone lost service right around the tower, which didn't bother me. I'd planned for that. What did bother me was how every landmark started blurring together. The same stand of pines cropped up again and again. At first, I thought I'd made a wrong turn, but every time I checked my notes, they said I was exactly where I should be. That's when I spotted it. A break in the trees, so narrow I almost passed it by. It looked more like a game trail than a road. Just a thin, cracked ribbon of pavement vanishing into the woods. No sign, no fresh tire tracks. My GPS showed nothing but a blank grid of squares. I put the Jeep in park and wrote down the coordinates in my notebook. For a few seconds, I just sat there tapping the pen against the dash. Part of me wanted to skip it and find something easier to document. But the idea of a road that didn't exist anywhere else, a place no one bothered to remember, felt like the exact reason I'd taken the job. I eased over the threshold, and the suspension gave a protesting creak as the front tires hit broken asphalt. Low branches tapped along the roof like fingertips. Half a mile in, the pressed so close I had to turn on the headlights. The pavement looked untouched. No ruts, no footprints, just a scatter of sticks and a few smooth river rocks. I rolled the windows down a few inches, telling myself the breeze would help clear my head. I crawled along in first gear. Another mile went by, and I started noticing something that made my scalp prickle. The shadows across the road didn't match the angle of the sun. I leaned forward over the wheel, squinting. The light was almost directly overhead, but long slanted shapes stretched across the asphalt, like they'd been cast by something taller than the trees. I pulled over and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet felt too complete, like the woods were holding their breath. I got out and stood in the middle of the road, studying the shadows. My heart thumped a little harder than I liked. I moved side to side, trying to find the angle where the shapes lined up with the branches. Nothing did. When I looked back down the road, the shadows had shifted. They were longer, reaching almost to my boots. I told myself I was tired, probably dehydrated. I tried opening the compass app on my phone, but the screen stayed black, just a faint glow that didn't resolve into anything useful. That's when I turned toward the Jeep and saw the rocks. They'd been arranged in a perfect row across the hood, each pale and round, like someone had picked them carefully. My pulse jumped so hard I had to steady myself against the fender. I hadn't heard anything. No footsteps, no branches cracking, just that smothered quiet. I brushed the rocks onto the shoulder, telling myself it had to be some prank or leftover marker from a survey crew decades back. I almost believed it until I walked another 20 yards up the road and turned around. Another row of rocks sat in the middle of the lane. This time, they formed a crooked arrow pointing deeper into the trees. My mouth went dry. I felt a bead of sweat run down my spine. I backed up slowly, stopping when my shoulder bumped the Jeep's mirror. I climbed in and slammed the door hard enough to make the glass rattle. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles hurt. I told myself I'd reverse all the way back to the turnoff. Simple, just take it slow. I eased into reverse. The tires crackled over leaves and gravel. For a few minutes, nothing moved. I tried not to blink, not to think about how the shadows seemed to crawl along the edges of my vision. Then I felt the bumper tap something solid. I looked up and saw another stack of rocks higher than the others, almost up to the headlights. I think I forgot to breathe for a moment. My throat felt too tight. I killed the engine and cracked the door. My hands shook as I reached for the handle. I leaned out, straining to hear anything, but there was nothing. No birds, no wind, just that blank, smothering silence. I kicked the rocks aside, my boots sliding on loose pebbles. My heart thudded so hard it almost hurt. I kept telling myself if I just got back to the main road, I'd never have to think about this place again. I got back in and shifted into drive. The idea of reversing again felt impossible. The road widened after another 10 minutes. I thought I'd finally find a spot to turn around. My shoulders started to unclench. Then I came around a bend and saw the pavement end in a wall of tangled undergrowth. I sat there, engine idling, staring at the brush. My breath came in short, shallow gulps. In the mirror, something flickered between the trees. Just a shape, quick and silent. I didn't look twice. I threw it in reverse and started inching backward, every nerve waiting for the next line of rocks. But instead, I rolled into a junction I hadn't noticed. A cracked road cut across the path, leading left and right. I didn't think. I turned right, just desperate to be anywhere else. 5 minutes later, I noticed the pavement had changed. It had gone pale, almost white under the tires. I slowed to a crawl. A wooden sign lay face down in the grass. I left the engine running and stepped out. My hands didn't feel steady as I flipped it over. Someone had carved numbers into the plank by hand. Coordinates. I read them again and again before I understood. They were the same numbers I'd written down when I first found the turnoff. It didn't matter how far I drove. I ended up right back here. My vision went fuzzy around the edges. I let the sign drop and stumbled back to the Jeep. I didn't check the mirrors after that. I kept my eyes straight ahead, hands locked on the wheel. I don't know how long I drove. The shadows kept shifting, and the road never seemed to end. Then finally, I saw a clearing. A squat brown ranger station faded flag, out front like some mirage. I pulled in so fast the tires threw gravel against the siding. My phone buzzed back to life, a single bar of service flickering in and out. I called Darren, one of my colleagues at the department. I tried to keep my voice calm. "There's no roads past the collapsed bridge," he said, sounding puzzled. "I'm looking right at the archive. It's just forest." I didn't answer right away. "I'll figure it out," I told him. He started to ask if I was okay. I hung up before he finished. I deleted every waypoint, every note, every track log. Then I shut off the engine and rested my forehead against the wheel. I sat there until my breathing finally slowed. I didn't drive back into those ridges for the rest of my life. I'm 26 years old, and that road trip through the Appalachian backroads still knots my stomach when I think about it. I recall how it began like any other spontaneous escape. Just a quick, inexpensive getaway before summer slipped away. Nothing fancy, just ditching the interstate, turning onto twisty back roads, chasing little towns we'd only ever heard about in stories or late-night playlists. It was early morning when we pulled out. The sun was tinted in pink and gold. The car was packed with too many snacks, chips that crunched loud, half-melted homemade cookies, and beer that was warmer than any of us admitted. The sound of tires on pavement, morning light glinting off the hood. It felt like everything was exactly as it should be. Initially, everything seemed to align. The GPS guided us onto a 2-lane ribbon of road curling into the hills. Trees arched. Overhead, branches close enough to brush the roof, creating a leafy corridor that smelled green and alive. We cracked jokes about being in a movie, about how authentic the Appalachians felt. Untouched, unspoiled, ours for the day. So, when our phones lost connection, 0 bars, blank screens, we laughed. "Welcome to unplugged mode," I said. We joked. It was part of the plan all along. No Instagram check-ins, no maps, but reality didn't take long to seep in. The GPS froze. Its map displayed a flat, straight road, but ahead of us the pavement snaked and twisted, disappearing in ways the screen couldn't record. We exchanged glances, shrugged. "Adventure," Evan said, brushing chip crumbs off his lap, sounding confident. But as the forest thickened, that shrug felt less casual. The first crooked sign appeared. We almost missed it, leaning to one side. Fresh wood painted in shaky letters. It read, "Creel's Fork, 8 miles. None of us had heard of it. I took a picture with my phone before it died completely. The joke was, I'd blog the trip someday, but only if I made it home. Then came more signs. Harper's Knob 5 miles, Jude's 12 miles, Elf Creek 9 miles, all in that same clumsy font. Some distances crossed out and rewritten. Arrows pointing in odd directions as if someone intended for us to circle. We laughed, but the laughter was weak, mixed with uneasy glances ahead. And then we saw the houses. I tried to joke about living somewhere so quiet no one cared about upkeep, but the houses looked like they'd collapsed mid-sentence. Porches buckled, paint curling in strips, roofs sagging as if they'd given up. I squinted through the windshield when a curtain fluttered. Nothing but fabric, but it felt deliberate. We passed a doorway swinging shut, too smoothly for wind. "Did you see that?" Megan whispered. Her voice was half a laugh, half a choke. For the first time, our jokes fell flat. Then Evan claimed he saw someone, a shape at the tree line. I turned, peered into the gloom, but saw only branches and shadows. Still, I didn't argue. I couldn't convince myself either way. No other cars appeared. No taillights behind us, no headlights ahead. Just us crawling through this narrowing road, the trees closing in. And then we reached a fork. To the left, a sign in splintered wood, Dead Hollow, 3 miles. The letters were shaky, painted quickly and unevenly. To the right, a rusted pickup, flat tires, half buried in the dirt. Abandoned, blocking the road. The woods on both sides felt like walls. "We're not going down a road called Dead Hollow," Megan said. Her voice was quiet, but firm. I heard her trying not to laugh or cry. Evan leaned forward, deadpan. "Sure, but you want to stay here with that thing?" He nodded at the truck. "Who abandoned it? Where did they go?" We stared. No one suggested anything. Finally, I turned the wheel toward Dead Hollow. There was no comfortable choice. The pavement ended immediately. The sedan rattled over gravel, then dropped onto dirt that shook our teeth. Branches scraped at the sides. The smell of damp earth seeped in through the vents, foggier and denser than any forest smell I'd known. Like it was breathing with us, we crept forward. No one talked. Headlights carved tunnels of light, shadows flickering against bark. The air felt still as if the woods were holding its breath. Then headlights ahead. A car. Relief swept through us. We leaned forward. But as we drew near, excitement drained. The car was sideways, blocking the road, both doors flung open, empty. "Don't stop." Evan's whisper was harsh, sudden. His hand gripped my shoulder tight, but there was nowhere to go. I edged forward until we were only feet away. We sat. Nothing moved. Not the branches, not the car, not even insects. Silence thick as fog. I cracked the window. "Can we?" My voice caught. No answer. No rustle. No bird. Just quiet pressing in. Then Evan jolted. I whipped around. A greasy outline smeared across the glass beside him. Fingers too long stretched across the whole pane. Almost human, but not. It wasn't there a second ago. I slammed the car into reverse. Tires screeched. Gravel spat. Branches rattled as we flew backward. Megan shouted. Evan twisted, scanning the dark. I hit the gas again. We didn't slow until asphalt met our wheels again. I'm 32 years old, and this happened after a long weekend trip back home. I'd gone to visit family out in Tennessee. Nothing dramatic, just one of those obligatory visits where you catch up with everyone, eat too much, and somehow leave more exhausted than when you arrived. By the time I was packing up to leave, I was running on 4 hours of sleep and 2 cups of bitter motel coffee. It was late, later than it should have been for starting a drive across state lines. I checked the GPS and saw that the highway was backed up from construction near the state line. I figured I'd be clever and take the back roads through the Appalachian hills. It looked like it would shave at least an hour off the trip. That's what the little blue line promised anyway. I'd done back road drives before, some potholes, maybe a deer or two, but nothing I couldn't handle. I didn't think twice about it. About an hour in, the GPS on my phone blinked out. At first, it just glitched. It froze for a few seconds, then flashed and kicked me to a blank, a map grid. No signal, no route, just a grey and white void with no roads on it. I gave it a second, reopened the app. Nothing. I wasn't worried yet. Back road maps were never reliable out here anyway. I figured if I kept heading in the same direction, I'd connect back to the highway eventually. These mountain roads might twist, but they always led somewhere. That was the logic. The drive grew quieter. A few scattered trailers sat far back from the road, barely visible except for the occasional porch light or flicker of a TV behind a dusty window. I passed maybe one car in the first hour, then nothing. The trees closed in tighter the further I went. It started to feel like the road wasn't meant for anyone anymore, like I was driving on memory. The pavement crumbled in places, and the curves came faster, sharper. I had to keep both hands tight on the wheel, just to feel like I was still in control. And that's when I noticed the mailbox. It sat crooked on the right side of the road, bent at the base like something had hit it years ago and no one had bothered to fix it. The numbers were worn to almost nothing, faded black paint flaking off in strips. I didn't think anything of it at first. There were tons of old homes out here. Mailboxes like that were a dime a dozen. The second time I saw it, I felt a tiny jolt, just enough to make me blink. Same tilt, same broken numbers, same angle to the road. I passed it and kept driving, but the air in the car felt different after that. Thicker, maybe. Third time, my hands were locked on the wheel. I even said something out loud, just this half laugh like, okay, that's weird. Fourth time, I pulled over. My headlights landed directly on the box, casting a long shadow that stretched into the trees. I just sat there staring at it through the windshield. My hands were trembling without me realizing it. I tried grounding myself, thinking maybe the road looped weirdly. Maybe I missed a turn. Maybe I was just tired. I muttered, "It's just a mailbox." Saying it out loud didn't help. Actually, it made it worse, like I was trying to convince something else in the car besides myself. Then headlights appeared behind me in the mirror. For a second, I felt real relief. Another driver. Maybe they knew the way out. Maybe they'd even pull over and explain what kind of ridiculous loop this was. But the lights didn't move. They just stayed. No matter how I adjusted my speed when I started driving again, slowing down or speeding up, the headlights matched me perfectly. Always the same distance back. Too far to see the car. Too close to feel comfortable. 20 minutes went by like that. I was too rattled to stop again, but I kept checking the mirror over and over. I finally did pull over, thinking if I gave them space, they'd pass. They didn't. They stopped too. Same position, same distance. Like a mirror that had been turned off. I turned off my engine. Headlights off. Instantly, their lights cut too. And the deep darkness. I've never felt anything like it. Not just black. It was like someone had erased the world outside the car. I couldn't see the road. Couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. My chest started to tighten. And for a second, I thought maybe I'd gone blind. I started the car again, and the engine turned over like nothing was wrong. I hit the gas. Next curve, there it was again. The mailbox. Only this time it had changed. The wood looked older, splintered deeper. The door sagged open now, rust streaks bleeding down the side like it had been crying. I drove past it again and again. Every loop, the box looked worse. Paint gone, numbers shredded. One time the post was so crooked I thought it had finally fallen, but nope. It was still there, still waiting. At some point, I grabbed my phone again, just hoping something had changed. No signal. I dialed 911 anyway, just pure reflex. Nothing. No ringtone, no static. Nothing. Later, when I checked, it said I'd called 12 times. I remember making the call once, maybe twice. That's it. The dashboard clock froze at 2:17 a.m. and wouldn't budge. I must have glanced at it a dozen times, hoping for progress, and it never changed. My odometer, though, that kept ticking. I wasn't driving in circles. The mileage kept climbing just without any new ground being covered. Eventually, I had to stop. I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled over again and got out. The air hit me, wet, cold, like stepping into a cave. I walked toward the mailbox. It didn't feel supernatural or mystical or whatever. It just felt wrong, off. The metal was slick under my fingers, colder than the air, real. But when I turned around to head back to the car, it was gone. The road was gone too. I was standing in a patch of wet leaves, trees all around me. No sign of asphalt. No sound but my own breathing. Then I heard it. An engine somewhere in the trees idling low. I ran toward the noise. Branches slapped against my arms. I tripped, stumbled, cut my leg open on something, but I didn't stop. The engine stayed distant like it was just over the next hill, the next patch of brush. No matter which way I turned, I ended up back at that damn mailbox. Same one. Still there. Still waiting. Then my phone vibrated. No sound. Just a long hot buzz against my leg. I pulled it out and the screen came on by itself. No lock screen, no apps. Just this white map. One single looping road traced over it again and again with little icons where every turn should be. Everyone was the same crooked mailbox stamped, like a rubber seal. That was the tipping point. I ran. No direction, no logic, just panic. And when I looked up again, my car was back right there on the road. Driver's door open. I didn't question it. I got in, slammed the lock, and floored it. I didn't stop for anything. The turns came fast, but I didn't care. I was running on adrenaline. The mailbox kept appearing and I refused to look. I stared straight ahead. I could see lights flashing in the mirror now and then. Sometimes one, set, sometimes two, but they never got closer. They never faded either. I drove like that for who knows how long. Then out of nowhere, I hit a straightaway and the trees dropped away. I shot out onto a 4-lane highway, like someone had unzipped the forest. No mailbox, no lights, just open road. I looked at the clock. 6:42 a.m. When I pulled into my driveway later, the odometer said I'd driven nearly 500 miles. That whole trip should have been under a 100. I've never touched those back roads again. I was 21 when I believed I finally grasped what freedom felt like. That summer, Cam borrowed his uncle's old camper van, a bulky, clunky vehicle that looked like it had been parked under a tree since the late 90s. The paint was a fading, swampy green, marked by patches of spreading rust. One of the rear windows had a garbage bag taped over it, but we didn't mind. Inside, it was surprisingly livable. 2 benches that folded out into beds, a tiny stove, a cooler, and just enough floor. Space to stretch out in if you'd mind sleeping curled up. It was sufficient. We didn't need motels, maps, or a plan. It meant we could just drive wherever we felt like, whenever we felt like it. Our third friend Leo had just finished his last semester of college. None of us had jobs lined up yet. We figured this was the perfect window. A few weeks where no one expected anything from us, no responsibilities, no schedules, just freedom. The real kind. The kind that feels like a blank page. The plan, if you could even call it that, was simple. Head towards the Appalachians and figure things out as we went. We'd follow the blue highways, those thin lines on the map that wind between small towns and lead you into the best kinds of getting lost. No interstates, no chain stores, just old diners, gas stations with creaky screen doors, and roads twisting through endless pine. The first few days felt like a movie. We'd point to names we couldn't pronounce and drive until we found them. We ate gas station jerky for lunch and $3 burritos at places called The Skillet or Mom's Grill. We stopped at scenic overlooks, climbed onto the roof of the van, and watched the sun dip behind the trees while mosquitoes feasted on our legs. Nights were a mix of half sleep and cheap beer. We parked in quiet spots behind abandoned buildings, next to rivers and gravel pull-offs, crashing in a tangle of limbs and sleeping bags. Sometimes it was too hot, sometimes freezing, but we didn't care. Every morning we woke up groggy, sore, and completely thrilled. But the deeper we got into the mountains, the more things started to feel off. Nothing dramatic, just little things. Towns that didn't appear on the GPS, signs pointing in two directions for the same place, roads that were freshly paved turning to gravel abruptly. One morning, we stopped at a diner where no one spoke to us, not even the waitress. She took our order without looking up, placed the plates on the table, and walked away as if we'd ruined her night. We joked about it at first, calling it Appalachian energy. But the deeper we went, the less amusing it felt. There was one road, I swear to this day, that we climbed uphill, the engine grinding the entire time. But outside the window, the trees seemed to lean downhill, as if gravity didn't function the same out there. On the fourth night, we camped by a stream. The day had been perfect. Clear water, flat rocks to lie on, just enough shade to prevent us from roasting. We drank too much, stayed out too late, and started packing up around 10 p.m. That's when Cam suggested we find a hot spring he'd heard about. A local guy at a gas station had told him it was hidden in the hills, completely free, barely marked, usually deserted after dark. It sounded fantastic at the time, the kind of hidden gem this whole trip was about. Leo was half asleep, but Cam was wired from too much coffee, so we figured, why not? We set off up a narrow 2-lane road that twisted immediately. No signs, no lights, just the GPS insisting it was a straight line while we navigated turn after turn. A few miles later, even the GPS gave up. It just blinked out. Cam laughed and said it had finally realized we had no idea what we were doing. But I wasn't laughing anymore. The trees pressed in tightly, leaning over the road. The pavement crumbled at the edges. No reflectors, no shoulder. It felt like we were inching up the spine of something ancient that didn't want us there. Then, around one ordinary bend, the headlights swept forward and caught them. A woman and a little boy walking directly down the center of the road. Cam shouted and jerked the wheel. The tires screamed, and for a moment, I thought we were going over the edge. The van fishtailed, then caught itself. The headlights froze them in place. And that moment is burned into my brain. She looked completely ordinary, like someone you'd see at the grocery store. Middle-aged, brown hair pulled back, a cardigan hanging loose. No expression on her face, just blank, as if she'd become separated from the boy's hand and hadn't realized it. She was gripping his wrist tightly. He was tiny, maybe 3 years old, wearing fuzzy blue footy pajamas with a bear stitched on the front. His eyes were wide, but he wasn't crying or speaking. He didn't even seem scared. They both just kept walking. They didn't glance at the van. They didn't pause. They simply stepped past us and disappeared into the dark. I turned to look, but the curve swallowed them. Cam exhaled the breath he'd been holding. "What the hell was that?" he asked. "Who brings a kid out here at night?" That's when it hit us. There hadn't been a house for miles. No driveway, no porch lights, no cars, just trees. Neither of us said anything after that. 15 minutes later, we reached the hot spring. It was supposed to be empty, peaceful, secluded. Instead, the gravel parking lot was lit up by headlights. A group of people moved around in panic. Flashlights cut through the trees. Someone was shouting a name over and over. We stepped out, confused, and immediately a woman ran toward us. "Have you seen a little boy? Please, he's wearing blue pajamas," she pleaded, her voice cracking. Cam and I looked at each other. My stomach dropped. I didn't need to say anything. I ran to the van, grabbed the dash cam off the windshield, rewound the feed, found the frame, and froze it. I turned the screen so she could see, and she collapsed. "That's him," she whispered. "That's my son." She begged us to take her there. Her husband jumped in beside her. his face tight, eyes unblinking. Leo stirred in the back, groggy and confused, but we didn't have time to explain. A line of cars followed as we drove back. The road looked even more surreal the second time. Every bend looked identical, every tree a copy of the last. Just when I started to doubt we'd ever find it, the headlights caught something small near the guardrail. The boy, he was sitting on the edge of the road, hugging his knees to his chest. Not crying, just waiting. Cam slammed on the brakes. His parents were out before we stopped moving. They ran to him, knelt, scooped him up. He was shaking, but he was okay. He told them the woman had taken his hand, walked him up the road, told him to sit by the rail and wait, said she'd be back soon. Then she stepped into the woods and vanished, just like that. We all stood there a long time, silent, listening to the wind in the trees and the murmur of voices behind us. Then the police arrived, took our statements, copied the dashcam footage, said they'd search the woods and keep us updated. They didn't. Weeks went by. No suspects, no follow-up, no missing persons matching her description. Nothing. They mailed the memory card back in a plain envelope. No note, but the footage never left my head. There's one frame right before they vanish around the bend. Just a flicker. Her head turns slightly towards the van, towards the camera, and she's smiling.